March 7, 1945. 11:12 a.m., western bank of the Rhine River. Second Lieutenant Aaron Whitaker, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, stood on a ridge overlooking the ancient Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, the last standing bridge between the Americans and the heart of Nazi Germany. He wasn't a frontline soldier. He wasn't supposed to decide the fate of armies. He was an engineer with a slide rule, a pocket notebook, and a headache from 2 nights without sleep. But in 3 minutes, a decision he made, a decision no manual prepared him for, would shape the final 2 months of World War II, determine the survival of thousands of American soldiers, and destroy the career of a German officer sworn to keep that bridge from falling into Allied hands. And the cruelest part? Aaron didn't even want to be there. The town of Remagen lay draped in fog, the Rhine running dark and fast beneath the massive steel trusses of the Ludendorff Bridge. Built in 1918 for the First World War, it was designed to rush troops east, not endure the relentless bombings and sabotage attempts it had survived over the past week. Whitaker rode in the passenger seat of a dusty Jeep as it bounced along a cratered road. His driver, Corporal Henry O'Donnell, a red-haired kid from Tennessee who chewed gum like it owed him money, glanced over. "You sure you want to come up this far, sir? Engineers don't usually volunteer for suicide trips." Aaron closed the leather-bound notebook on his lap. Inside were sketches, load-bearing formulas, and stress diagrams he'd memorized long before he shipped overseas. "If that bridge is still standing," Aaron said, "it's the fastest way across the Rhine. And if it's wired to blow, someone needs to know how to save it." Henry chuckled. "Sir, if the Krauts wanted that thing gone, it's gone." Aaron didn't answer. He remembered the briefing 2 nights ago, Eisenhower's staff insisting that every bridge over the Rhine had been destroyed, blown by desperate German commanders. Every single one. Except maybe Remagen. A rumor. A whisper. No confirmation. The closer they got, the more Aaron felt the knot tightening in his stomach. He wasn't infantry. He wasn't trained for this. But he was the only one in the division with heavy bridge engineering experience, and if Remagen existed, it could turn the final phase of the war from a bloody grind into a rapid advance. One bridge could end the war sooner. Save thousands. He exhaled slowly. Unless the Germans blew it while he was standing on it. They reached the outskirts of a small German village riddled with shell holes and ash. A forward command post buzzed with radio chatter. Aaron barely stepped out of the Jeep before a gravelly voice barked. "You Whitaker? The bridge doctor?" Captain Samuel Dean, 104th Infantry Division, a broad-shouldered officer with a voice rougher than the muddy boots he wore, handed Aaron a field scope. "Take a look, Lieutenant." Aaron raised the scope to his eye. There it was. The Ludendorff Bridge. Long, skeletal, towering over the Rhine. Its steel arches stretched eastward like ribs of a dying giant. Smoke curled from distant fires but the bridge stood. A miracle. "Holy hell," Henry whispered. Aaron lowered the scope. "Why is it still intact?" Captain Dean spat in the mud. "Because the man guarding it, a Colonel Hans Scheller, is either the bravest German in the army or the dumbest. Intel says Hitler personally ordered every Rhine bridge destroyed. But Scheller kept this one standing." Aaron frowned. "Doesn't make sense. Why leave your enemy a direct road into Germany?" "Maybe he's saving it for his own retreat," Dean said. "Or maybe he's planning to blow it when we're halfway across." That was what worried Aaron. If the Germans detonated the charges during an American crossing, thousands could drown in the icy Rhine. Tanks could plunge 50 feet into the current. Aaron turned to the captain. "Has anyone checked for explosives?" "No one can get close. Sniper fire's nasty. But we know it's wired. It has to be." Aaron opened his notebook, flipping to a rough illustration of German demolition practices. "If it was prepped using standard doctrine, they'll have charges on the support piers. Possibly under the decking. Maybe inside the towers. Dean nodded. Good. Then your job is simple. Aaron raised an eyebrow. Dean grinned grimly. Figure out how to get across before the damn thing blows. March 7, 1945, 10:25 a.m. Artillery thundered as Aaron moved with an infantry platoon toward the western end of the bridge. Machine gun fire snapped overhead. German MG-42s chattered from the towers like mechanical demons. Captain Dean shouted over the noise. Move! Move! Engineers to the front. Aaron wasn't supposed to be at the tip of the assault. But he needed to see the bridge up close. Needed to know if it could hold tanks. Needed to know if the Germans could collapse it at any second. As they reached a stone retaining wall, Aaron crouched beside Staff Sergeant Miller, a grizzled veteran with soot-streaked cheeks. Miller shoved binoculars into his hands. Take a look. Our boys from a company are pinned down. Krauts have the towers zeroed. Aaron scanned the length of the bridge. The decking looked warped. A section of railing hung twisted. But the steel trusses, despite rust and scars, remained intact. Then Aaron spotted something that made his blood run cold. Cables. Running along the underside. Leading into the towers. Running across the decking into the eastern bunker. Demolition wires. Miller noticed his expression. Bad news? Aaron swallowed. If they trigger those charges, everything on the bridge goes into the river. Then we better get moving. An explosion rocked the far end. Smoke billowed. A Sherman tank rolled forward, its 75mm gun barking at the tower windows. The bridge shook. Miller shouted, "Infantry! Advance!" Dozens of American soldiers surged onto the bridge, hugging the sides, firing upward toward the towers. Aaron followed, clutching his notebook in one hand and his Colt pistol in the other. He wasn't a combat soldier, but today, he had no choice. Bullets sparked off the steel trusses. Chunks of concrete blew off the towers. An MG-42 raked the walkway, forcing Aaron to dive behind a support beam. His heart pounded. Above him, a German soldier leaned out of a tower window, preparing to throw a grenade. Aaron didn't think. He acted. He fired 3 shots. The soldier toppled backward, grenade rolling harmlessly onto the floor. Aaron stared at the smoking pistol in his hand. His fingers trembled. Miller slapped his shoulder. Hell of a shot, Lieutenant. Aaron didn't feel proud. He felt sick. But the mission wasn't to fight. It was to save the damn bridge before it collapsed. On the eastern side of the river, inside a cold stone bunker overlooking the bridge, Colonel Hans Scheller stared at the detonator box. His gloved hands shook, not from fear, but anger. 2 weeks ago, he had begged Army Group B for more explosives. They denied him. 2 days ago, he requested engineering teams to reinforce the charges. Denied again. Now he stood with half the explosives he needed, and a bridge Hitler demanded destroyed at all costs. Scheller slammed his fist against the concrete wall. This is insanity, he muttered. Lieutenant Karl Metz, a gaunt young officer with hollow cheeks, spoke cautiously. Sir, scouts report Americans approaching from the west. Fast. Scheller paced the room. If we blow it too early, our own retreat is cut off. Too late, and the Americans capture it. Metz swallowed. High command says the bridge must fall, sir. Scheller stopped pacing. I know what Berlin wants, he whispered harshly. But I will not kill my own men just to satisfy their fantasies of a glorious last stand. He stared across the river through a slit window. American tanks. Infantry. Engineers. All moving with terrifying speed. Scheller gripped the bridge railing in the distance with his gaze. If they reach the bridge before I blow it, he exhaled. No. They won't. He glanced at the detonator. It wasn't ready. It wasn't guaranteed. But it was all he had. He turned to Metz. Prepare the charges. Ready the firing line. But don't press that plunger until my order. Metz nodded. Scheller prayed silently. 10:58 a.m. They reached the midpoint of the bridge under a storm of gunfire. Aaron crouched beside the west tower, panting. Captain Dean joined him. Whitaker. What's your call? Can this thing hold armor? Aaron looked at the steel beams. The supports were scarred but stable. The main trusses, though dented and rusted, maintained structural integrity. But the real danger wasn't stress. It was explosives. Aaron pointed at the cables. They have at least 4 firing lines connected. Possibly redundant. We need to cut as many as we can. Dean nodded to Miller. Cover the lieutenant. Move. Aaron sprinted toward the underside access hatch. Bullets whined overhead. He slid into the lower catwalk, tools rattling on his belt. Below him, the Rhine churned violently. If he fell, the current would drag him under. He found the first cable cluster. Thick. Black. Wrapped tightly. He pulled wire cutters from his pouch. Henry's voice echoed from above. Sir. Is that safe? No, Aaron muttered. Not even a little. He cut the first line. Nothing happened. Then the second. Then the third. On the fourth line. A deep rumble shook the bridge. Aaron froze. For a heartbeat, he thought the Germans had blown the charges. But the bridge didn't fall. He climbed back to the decking. Captain Dean approached, shielding his eyes from smoke. What was that? Aaron scanned the east tower. It was buckling. German engineers had attempted a partial detonation, not enough explosives to destroy the bridge outright, but enough to cripple it. Aaron shouted over the roar. They're trying to collapse the tower. If that goes, the whole span might follow. A massive crack echoed through the steel. The tower leaned violently but didn't fall. Dean exhaled. Damn thing is tougher than it looks. The Americans pushed forward, clearing the eastern half. The last defenders retreated toward the far bank. Aaron caught his breath. The bridge held. The Germans had failed barely. 11:09 a.m., east bank of the Rhine. Colonel Scheller watched the American infantry closing in. His detonation attempt had damaged the bridge, but he lacked enough explosives to finish the job. Metz approached, pale and desperate. Sir, the Americans, they're almost here. Scheller closed his eyes. For years he had followed orders faithfully. But Berlin had abandoned him. Supplies cut. Reinforcements non-existent. Rumors of officers executed for failing to destroy bridges haunted him. If he surrendered the bridge intact. If he blew it too early. If he failed at all. Hitler would have him shot. But he made his choice. Metz, Scheller said quietly, prepare to surrender. Metz stared in shock. Sir, that is a court-martial. Better a court-martial than killing thousands in a pointless gesture. Scheller stepped out of the bunker, raising a white cloth. The war is lost. No more senseless deaths. But before he could finish, a shell impacted the bunker behind him, throwing him forward. American soldiers surrounded the remaining defenders. Scheller lay in the mud, staring up at the hazy sky. He whispered, at least, the bridge still stands. 11:12 a.m. The bridge was secured. But now came the hard part. Captain Dean strode toward Whitaker as artillery thundered in the distance. Lieutenant, armor wants to cross now. Aaron blinked. Sir, the structure is compromised. The east tower's foundation is cracked. If tanks cross. Dean grabbed his shoulder. If we don't cross now, the Germans regroup. They bring artillery. They shell this thing until it collapses anyway. Aaron looked back at the trusses, at the decking, at the crippled tower leaning like a wounded animal. The calculations raced through his mind. Load distribution. Yield strength. Stress cycles. Lateral torsion. He pictured the bridge like a living organism, wounded, straining, but refusing to fall. Dean spoke quietly. Son, thousands of men are waiting for your call. Aaron closed his eyes. He saw the river swallowing vehicles. Saw tanks sliding into freezing water. Saw men trapped inside. But he also saw the strategic map. The Rhine was Germany's final barrier. If they crossed here, today, the war could end weeks sooner. Maybe months. He inhaled slowly. Sir, he said, I'll walk the span. Check every beam, every joint. If I say yes, armor crosses immediately. Aaron stepped onto the central decking alone. The world seemed to narrow into steel and wind and the echoing groans of stressed metal. He tapped each beam with a wrench. He measured deflection with his ruler. He recorded torque values on his sleeve when he ran out of paper. Halfway across, he stopped at the eastern tower. A 5-inch crack ran down the reinforced concrete like a lightning bolt. He whispered to himself. 70 tons, the Sherman will push it, but maybe. He moved under the tower. Rust flakes drifted down like snow. The bridge moaned under shifting loads. He placed his palm on the steel. It was warm from the explosions. Alive. Fighting. Just like the men who would cross it. He returned to Captain Dean, face streaked with rust and sweat. Dean asked softly. Well? Aaron hesitated one last moment. Then. It holds, he said. But only if traffic moves single file. No stopping. No bunching. 50-foot spacing between tanks. Dean grinned wide. You heard the man. Get armor forward. Aaron felt his knees weaken. He had just changed the war. A Sherman tank from the 9th Armored Division rumbled toward the bridge. Soldiers lined the sides, cheering, praying, holding their breath. The tank clattered onto the wooden planks. The bridge shook. The eastern tower groaned a deep metallic moan. Aaron clenched his fists. Every foot forward felt like a heartbeat. The tank rolled past the midpoint. Past the cracked tower. Onto the eastern bank. A roar erupted from the American troops. Aaron exhaled so hard he nearly collapsed. One tank across. Then another. Then another. Within an hour, over 8,000 American troops had crossed into Germany. The impossible became history. Years later, historians praised generals, battle plans, armored divisions. But few remembered Second Lieutenant Aaron Whitaker, the engineer who walked alone across a dying bridge and chose to trust his calculations over his fear. The Ludendorff Bridge collapsed 10 days later from accumulated damage. But by then, it didn't matter. The Americans already held a massive bridgehead. The German defensive line crumbled. The war in Europe ended in 2 months. Aaron returned home to Ohio, where he taught engineering at a small university and never boasted about the day he decided the fate of armies. When asked what he remembered most, he once said, "It wasn't the explosions. Or the gunfire. It was the feeling of that bridge under my boots, like it knew we needed it to stand, just a little longer."